Most people knew little to nothing about the U.S.S. Gerald R. Ford CVN-78 until President Trump visited the ship in March of 2017. Here's a picture of him touring the carrier. I like this picture because in it are two Naval Academy classmates of mine, the Chief of Naval Operations at the time, John Richardson, and the CEO of Huntington Ingalls, Mike Petters. So after this visit, the president put out some words that the Navy very much liked, which is he sees the value of carrier power in terms of our global presence, and he wants us to have at least 12 aircraft carriers going forward. That is great in terms of the Navy's approach to the program of record and defense budgets in the out years. But at some point, one of the crew members got his ear, somebody who is involved in the electromagnetic aircraft launching system, EMALS. This system uses electric impulses to a core magnet instead of steam to power the catapults. It's a generational shift in technology to launch airplanes off an aircraft carrier. But this crew member said that it wasn't working and he wished that they would stick with steam. So the president glommed onto that narrative. So just over 2 years after that initial visit to Ford, President Trump was aboard the U.S.S. Wasp in the Western Pacific, where he gave these remarks.
Then let me ask you a question. Catapult, right? The Catapult system. Do you like electric or steam? Steam. Who said electric? There's one guy back there. Okay, I really need this information because, you know, we're building carriers. We're building one. They're using an electric catapult and an electric elevator. Number one, I can't imagine in the case of battle, it must be very delicate, okay? And, you know, steam's only worked for about 65 years perfectly. And I won't tell you this because it's before my time by a little bit, but they have a $900 million cost overrun on this crazy electric catapult. I said, what was wrong with steam? I would like to know, all of the folks that know exactly what I'm talking about, the Catapult system, steam or electric, ready? Steam, electric, he works for the enemy. He's all right. Well, you might be in danger. I better be careful. No, we want to go with steam. You know, they're always coming up with new ideas. They're making planes so complex you can't fly them. You know that? No, I admit, they want to show next. And we all want innovation, but it's too much. But there's never been anything like the steam catapults. And I went to the Gerald Ford, which is under construction now for a long time. They're having a problem with their electric catapult. And I was talking to the catapult people, and they said, steam. In the meantime, we're spending all that money on electric, and nobody knows what it's going to be like in bad conditions, you understand? So I think I'm going to put an order. When we build a new aircraft carrier, we're going to use steam. I'm going to just put out an order. We're going to use steam. We don't need that extra speed. You know, they were saying, one of the folks said, no, the electric works faster. But, sir, we can only get the plane there every couple of minutes. So really, what they did was wrong. And we make mistakes, but generally speaking, we get it right. But when we make them, we have to correct them. So we're going to put out an order. We want to use steam.
So fast forward from the remarks that the president made aboard Wasp in May of 2019 to Thanksgiving of 2019. And the president is making some phone calls to military leaders around the globe, including Captain Pat Hanafin, who is the CEO of U.S.S. Ronald Reagan. Listen to this conversation.
From the U.S. Navy, we have the commanding officer, Captain Pat Hanafin. And Pat, are you on the phone?
Yes, sir, I'm with you. And from the over 4,800 sailors and airmen aboard U.S.S. Ronald Reagan, the nation's only permanently forward-deployed aircraft carrier. We are currently in Victoria Harbor, Hong Kong, about 13 hours ahead of you. Still Thanksgiving here. And from all the sailors on board Reagan, serving peace through strength for America in the Indo-Pacific. We wish you a happy Thanksgiving.
Well, that's great, Pat. I appreciate it very much, and say hello to everybody, and happy Thanksgiving to you. So the condition of the ship is A1?
Alpha 1, sir, absolutely.
Okay, good. Very important. So, we have another big one. The Gerald Ford is going to be joining you pretty soon. How does this compare in size and scope with the Gerald Ford? You know all about that. That's the new one, right?
Yes, sir. Size and scope, a good friend of mine just left command of that. But size and scope about the same. Certainly some improvements there to the plants and a few of the radars and even the catapults and gear are slightly different as well. But we'll push over 140 a day daily.
Yeah, Pat, tell me about the catapult system. So on the Gerald Ford, they don't use steam, which is the first one that I've ever heard of that doesn't use steam. And I know they have some difficulties, which I'm not happy about, and they spent a lot of money. And I was just curious, the steam system is tried and true for many, many years, as long as we've had aircraft carriers. How do you find steam versus what they're doing on the Gerald Ford, which is electronic and digital, if you can believe it?
Yes, sir. All of our Nimitz super carriers have been using steam for decades, and we find it pretty reliable. However, the electromagnetic catapults that they're running there offer some great benefits. Obviously, like any new piece, you got to work through the bugs, but they offer some benefits not only to stress and strain on the aircraft to extend service life and other pieces. I have no doubt we'll work through that just as we work through all of our other advancements and continue to bring it to the enemy when called to do so.
So when you do the new carriers, as we do and as we're thinking about doing, would you go with steam or would you go with electromagnetic? Because steam is very reliable. And the electromagnetic, unfortunately, you have to be Albert Einstein to really work it properly. What would you do?
Yes, sir. You sort of have to be Albert Einstein to run the nuclear power plants that we have here as well, but we're doing that very well. I would go, sir, Mr. President, I would go electromagnetic cats. I think that's the way to go. We do pay a heavy cost for transiting the steam around the ship.
Good. Okay. I like to hear that. I'm actually happy about that answer because at least, they're doing what they're doing, but that's actually a very good answer.
An article in The Atlantic about this time framed it pretty well, so let me read this to you. It's not that EMALS has been a smashing success. Cost and schedule overruns have given the Navy carrier project a reputation for being, quote, one of the most spectacular acquisition debacles in recent memory, end quote, as Senator John McCain, the Arizona Republican, put it in 2015. The construction of 3 Ford-class aircraft carriers has swelled from $27 billion to $36 billion in the last 10 years. But the problems with the Ford-class carrier program are more organizational than technological, a common theme among infrastructural megaprojects. McCain blamed the vast bureaucracy of defense acquisition systems, which span multiple offices and program managers. So that was the Atlantic about the same time that President Trump had that phone call with Captain Hanafin. So sometimes improvements in technology drive procurement. Once you have a jet engine, you don't want propeller planes. Once you have supersonic fighters, you don't want subsonic fighters. Once you have precision-guided munitions, you don't want dumb bombs. Once you have stealth capability, you don't want airplanes that aren't stealth. So that's a driver for military procurement as we go forward. The same is true in terms of the difference between Nimitz class and Ford class. The Nimitz class has been around since the late 60s. At this point, we have 10 of them. Now, the 10 Nimitz class are not carbon copies of each other. Each one's a little different. As technology improved over the decades that these ships were being made, they tried to incorporate them on each new one that was being built. But by and large, they're the same, meaning they use the Mark 7 catapult system, the arresting gear is the same nuclear power plant, and the islands have movable radars. So in the early 2000s, a design team came to the Navy and said, we have a technology that will eliminate the need to make steam to power your cats. The Navy was all ears. Because, as Captain Hanafin said, the need to generate steam is a huge burden on the nuclear reactors and the crew. So based on that idea, they started to design the Ford class. So what's with all the bad press? What is the ground truth about the U.S.S. Gerald R. Ford? So I read the CRS report, so you don't have to. The high points are we have 4 Ford class carriers in the program of record: Ford, Kennedy, Enterprise, and the Miller. Ford costs roughly $13 billion. Kennedy is programmed to cost roughly $11 billion, so there are some efficiencies being realized as we learn lessons from the manufacturer of Ford. And the last of the 4 is not scheduled to hit the fleet until 2032. So this is a lengthy process to get these ships built. One of the main problems with Ford overall has been the number of systems that they're trying to put on this new class of carrier at the same time. In fact, at a recent conference in the Washington, D.C. area, the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Mike Gilday, said the following, quote, "We had 23 new technologies on that ship, which quite frankly increased the risk of delivery on time and cost right from the get-go. We really shouldn't introduce more than maybe 1 or 2 new technologies on any complex platform like that in order to make sure that we keep risk at a manageable level." End quote. So you heard the CNO talk about 23 new technologies. I want to focus on 4. These 4 particularly are what make the Ford class carrier a generational improvement and what will underwrite our ability to control the seas for decades to follow. Here's a nice diagram of 16 of the 23. Let's focus on the 4 major ones, starting with the electromagnetic aircraft launching system, EMALS. So as I said, EMALS uses linear induction, basically magnetic electric fields, to drag the shuttle down the cat. Different than the Mark 7 system that I used for basically 825 cat shots over the course of my career. As you see in this diagram here, the Mark 7 system is powered by steam, piped through the ship into cylinders, and is used to drive these rams down the cat track and drag airplanes into the air. So now with Ford class, you don't have to dedicate part of the power generated to the generation of steam. That's a big selling point. As Captain Hanafin said, he spends a lot of time aboard the U.S.S. Ronald Reagan chasing steam around the ship to power the cats. So with EMALS, it was first tested at the field up at Lakehurst. You can see the footage here of a C-2 Greyhound using EMALS to launch, and a Super Hornet. Looks like it's working great. Then you take it to the ship. So when they first tried to put EMALS aboard the carrier, it didn't fit. So back to the drawing board, literally. They had to redesign some of the spaces in order that the system would fit where it needs to be. Also, it was heavier than originally designed, so that required some workarounds to make sure you maintain the designed center of buoyancy of the Ford. But eventually they worked out the bugs. You can see here the first ever Catapult shot. This is a VX-23. That's the developmental test team at Pax River, launching on Cat 1 of Ford. Another great feature of EMALS is because these are digital programmed catapults, the shot is more linear, meaning smoother, and therefore it won't bust systems during the stroke. We had that happen at Tomcat a lot. By the end of the stroke on some of the older carriers, you would dump your IMU and other stuff and basically be blind when you got airborne. With the EMALS system, that won't be the case. The other major selling point about EMALS is it's easier to maintain. I've seen a Mark 7 cat torn apart while we were in port. The deck crew got no liberty during that time, and they were covered in grease. It is a serious mess. The promise of EMALS is easier to maintain and fewer personnel required to maintain it. The other promise of EMALS is the frequency between cat shots. So you don't have to wait for the steam plant to get back up to pressure in order to launch another airplane. It's ready to go as soon as the shuttle gets back to the starting position. So in theory, this would generate more sorties. The limiting factor now becomes how quickly can pilots taxi over the JBD and get in the shuttle. So for me, this is good news in that many times my pilot and I have been sitting in the shuttle waiting for the steam plant to get up to speed before we can launch. So I'm buying the idea that EMALS will allow the Ford class to shoot more airplanes quicker than the Nimitz class. Another thing the CNO mentioned recently about the Ford program, and this has been a high-vis subsystem, the weapons elevators. So CNO Gilday recently said the following, quote, "One of the things you learned from the Ford program was the importance of land-based testing on new systems before you introduce them to the fleet." So the elevators, unlike the catapults that were tested at Lakehurst before they were put on the ship, and even then, as I said, they've had some issues in terms of making them fit, not to mention making them work once they have them in place. So with the weapons elevators, they just stuck them on the ship and then discovered that they didn't work. So they've had to do a bunch of testing and retesting, and it's delayed the ship's schedule, and these delays cost money. There are some self-inflicted wounds. To Senator McCain's point, it's not the technology, it's the execution, the programmatics, and the way the acquisition system works. So the second new system is the Advanced Arresting Gear, the AAG. So the legacy arresting gear that's on Nimitz is an old system. Here you see the two-wire arresting gear mechanism for the U.S.S. Abraham Lincoln. You can see the long cylinders on either end, and those are full of hydraulic fluid, and that's what slows the aircraft as it comes aboard. These long cylinders are called rams, and when an airplane traps, it is really loud. I can tell you this because on every carrier I was on, our ready room was right next to one of the arresting gear machines, and as we briefed, we'd keep one eye on the plat camera, so when somebody trapped, you'd plug your ears and wait for the wire and then start the brief again. This system requires a lot of maintenance. It's also an analog system that requires an automatic overhaul when you reach a certain amount of arrested landings, regardless of the condition of the equipment at that time. So most of the Nimitz class have 4 arresting wires. Ford only has 3. So that AAG doesn't use that long cylinder to stop the motion of an airplane after it catches the wire. It uses a paddle wheel system. The other thing about the advanced arresting gear and EMALS is they have health monitoring, which neither the Mark 7 nor the legacy arresting gear have. So this is safer in that these systems will flag issues before it's too late. Now, both EMALS and AAG will allow the Ford class to operate unmanned aircraft. Nimitz class arresting gear systems have trouble with lightweight aircraft like future planned unmanned aircraft, because they're not heavy enough when they touch down to have the wire, what they call reeve, pay out. So the wire basically acts as a static barrier, and it would just rip the tailhook off of the drone. So the AAG takes care of that problem. And this is the future planned force. Unmanned platforms are part of the program going forward. So the bottom line with the two systems, EMALS and AAG, safer flight ops, more sorties, less maintenance, fewer personnel required to operate and maintain the systems. The next thing you see is the island. The island looks nothing like a Nimitz class island. First, it's located dramatically further aft than on the Nimitz class, and it's also outboard. This is mostly for radar signature. This island also generates less burble, which is the disturbance in the airflow that can affect airplanes as they're trying to land. It has no moving parts, so you're not going to see any antennas twirling around like you do on a Nimitz class. Its signature system is a dual band radar. Now, the dual band radar is not state of the art. Because of the time it takes to procure these systems, it's already behind the times, but it is a big improvement over what Nimitz has. So the last major system that the Ford has are different reactors. Ford powers its new systems with 2 A1B nuclear reactors that can generate almost 3 times more power than the A4W reactors used on Nimitz class carriers. So again, this is what not having to generate steam for the Cats yields. Now, 3 times more power can be used for a lot of things. So as we talk about the near-peer conflict and the return to the high-end fight vis-a-vis China and Russia and hypersonic weapons and the vulnerability of an aircraft carrier, this can be used for self-defense system, directed energy weapons, and other things that Nimitz class couldn't even conceive of because you couldn't generate the kind of power required for these things. So we'll stay tuned for rail guns and different things going forward that will be game changers with respect to the ship's self-defense capability. Ford recently had what we call shock trials, something they initially tried to skip with Ford and do with Kennedy, but the late Senator McCain insisted that they do these shock trials, so they did these a couple of months ago, and by all reports, they went well. So another thing to note about left-hand, right-hand of procurement is the Ford cannot operate with F-35Cs. It's not configured. In order to do so, you have to modify some of the spaces for some of the classified stuff on an F-35, and you have to beef up the jet blast deflectors because that single engine is really hot, and over time on a deployment, you'd start to melt the JBD, so that's not good. So that modification is going to be what they call feathered in time once the Ford needs other planned maintenance. In fact, there's only one aircraft carrier that can operate with the F-35C currently. That's the Carl Vinson, underway right now for the first time with the F-35. And the other aircraft carriers are scheduled to be modified along with other maintenance as we go forward to be able to deploy with F-35Cs. So at Sierra Space, that same recent conference, CNO also said he wants to have Ford deployed in 2022 for the first time. So just like with any game-changing technology, after all of the heartaches, the cost overruns, the schedule breaches, the test point failures, you get a capability. And in the case of the Ford class, I'm optimistic that we're creating a capability that will serve the nation for decades to come. As we saw with the Ever Given, when that container ship got stuck in the Suez Canal, the resin effects of sea commerce shutting down are substantial. So that was one ship stuck in the Suez Canal. Imagine what something like a war with China would do to global markets. Like the Nimitz class has done so well, the Ford class carrier is designed to make sure that doesn't happen. All right, that's going to do it for this episode. If you're a first-time viewer, please ring the bell and become a subscriber. Give me the likes, very important to the algorithm. Please comment. The discussions we get going among this channel's community are a true value add. If you'd like to help support the channel, please consider using the super thanks in the comments or become a patron at patreon.com/WardCarroll. Check the links below for official t-shirts and merch and how to pre-order the forthcoming reissue of the PUNK'S Trilogy. And when you do so, use the discount code PUNKYT at checkout. And in the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again soon.